Good morning, Jack's Church. My name is Keith Davis. We are so grateful to be able to be here with you guys today. Thank you for having us in this weekend. It's been an incredible time for our family. It's been faith-building and inspiring. You know, today I want to talk about God-sized dreams, and it's something that really can help expound our faith. It can help us to grow in our individual walks and just move us along as we grow as disciples. You know, when I was a young Christian, some of the brothers in the singles ministry were active outdoorsmen. They were loving the outdoors and they loved to get out and do things. So it didn't take me very long to gravitate towards these guys. They were fun. Not only were they adrenaline junkies, but they proved to me that life as a Christian could be fun. And I didn't always believe that. For a long time, I thought Christians was just a bunch of rules of what we couldn't do instead of seeing what we got to do. You know, so we hiked, we fished, we went spelunking. If you don't know what that is, it's caving. We mountain biked. Anything we could do to get outside, we were excited to do. We got outside and did that. You know, one of the guys had been training for what he called an eco challenge. And what the eco challenge was, it was 12 miles of biking. It was 3-mile run and a 5-mile kayak. And it was a lot of fun. And so he recruited myself and one other brother to join him in these eco challenges. So we were training most every Saturday. We were training. And if you know anything about the heat in Tennessee, it's sweltering, a little bit like Florida. And most of the time, it was just me out there trying not to die. Well, one of these days, it was 363 degrees and crazy humidity. And we took the bikes out for a ride, and we worked really hard, and we rolled back into the trucks. And we got back to the truck, we pulled the kayaks out, and one of the guys was a little bit behind us. So James and I, we pulled out the kayaks, we got suited up, and we went down into the river. We're still waiting on Hank to join us. And Hank is running a little bit behind. So we hop out of the kayaks and we're swimming just so we can cool down and having fun. Well, it didn't take long, and this is us going down the river. It didn't take long, and we're waiting for Hank to get there, and all of a sudden, we heard that distinctive sound. At first, it was just a trickle, but then it was like a waterfall. And we turned around and like, whoa, what are you doing? And there was Hank peeing in the river, upstream. And James is like, bro, don't you know how rivers work? And Hank's still not getting it. It's like, what? I'm not peeing on you. And it's like, hey, whatever you're doing in the water upstream comes down to us. And then it was like a light bulb went off in Hank's mind. He's like, oh, I get it now. And he's like, then he starts making these jokes. Well, is the water getting warmer? Is it getting warmer where you guys are? So for the rest of the trip, that was kind of the joke. You know, is it getting warmer yet? You guys feeling the warmth of the water? You know, Hank was a few fries short of a Happy Meal. It was quite the day. You know, so as we're going down, we're doing this. You know, it's important for us to understand and know how a river works, right? Water flows from upstream, from the head down river as it goes. It's not just with rivers, though. It's also important for us to understand that just like rivers, life kind of works this way as well. The water where you are now will eventually flow downstream to others. Others will be in your downstream. Everything that we do today will have effects in our downstream tomorrow. Today, you know, the things you do today, whether it'll affect your marriage tomorrow, or if you're not married, it's going to affect who you're going to marry tomorrow. It could affect your kids, your family, your friends, your career. There's always something coming downstream. Everybody is living in someone's downstream, whether it's good or for the bad. And everybody is living in your downstream, whether it's the good for the bad. You know, there's a tendency to think of this just in the context of negativity, that, you know, my bad choices are going to affect a lot of people down in my downstream. And as a parent, you're certainly very tuned into this because you don't want to make sure that you're feeling that, gosh, my consequences for my sins are going to affect my children. They're going to affect others. But the great news is in the kingdom of God, this doesn't just work to the negative. It also works to the positive. I love what God says to the Israelites in Isaiah 20. And he says this. Okay, there we go. We're one behind there. Okay, so it says, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for their sins to their parents, to the third and fourth generation. And I read that and I'm like, oh man, that's so discouraging that my sin can affect my children for 3 and to 4 generations. And I read that and at first I'm like, oh, it's so depressing because I think about all of my sins, all of my mistakes. But in the same passage, the Lord says to Israel, he says, but your faithfulness will be passed down to 1,000 generations. So the negative, it'll last 3 to 4 generations possibly. But your faithfulness in God, it'll go on for 1,000 generations. I mean, the magnitude of this is your downstream river is building and building and building. So 1,000 years from now, the decisions you make today will have lasting impacts, not just on your children, not just on your grandchildren, but on your great-grandchildren and their great-grandchildren and their great-great-great-grandchildren. Decisions of faith will have a lasting impact on our lives. There is a tendency for us in our broken human hearts to only focus on these negative aspects of this. That yes, when we sin, when we blow it, we have accused personalities, we recognize that, and we just think, I have scarred my family and my friends forever. But when I read this promise that God gave Israel, saying your faithfulness will far outweigh all of the negatives that you do. So let me put this together for a second. If you're a disciple of Jesus and you're living in the right now you are living in the downstream of a lot of other people. You're living in somebody else's goodness. You're living in somebody else's faithfulness. You're living in somebody else's generosity, their sacrifices, what they surrendered, their service. Whether you know it, recognize it, or not, you are living in other people's downstream. So none of us came to a place of faith on our own. It had to do with so many factors, more than we can even account to. You think about the first century, about Christians dying for their faith because they knew that they had to continue to live this, to pass it on. Even in terrible persecution, they were still teaching, baptizing, and training their children that this is the way that we must live our lives. You go on throughout the centuries, and there's been a lot of battles. There was the battles with the Catholic Church that we've all got to conform to this. And there was the battles with the world, that the world would come back in, and the world's teachings would water down the teachings of Jesus and the church. So all of these factors, but people continued to carry the gospel to us, to protect the gospel, to protect the Bible, so that we would have these scriptures. Your same decisions that you make today will impact future generations. What if the greatest days of the Jax Church isn't right now? What if the greatest time in the Jax Church isn't even 10 years from now? What if it's not 20 years from now or 50 years from now? I know that's a discouraging thought because we come from a society where we want to see results. We want instant gratification. We want to see God move. But are we the kind of people that are going to trust in God, that God, whatever you put in front of us, we're going to walk forward so that we can live outside of a dream that's just bigger than ourselves? That we could be a part of a dream that God has for us, to understand that our lives and the dream that God has for our lives is bigger than what we dream for ourselves. That we will be the kind of people that allow our souls to be rooted in something bigger than just the moment we're living in. We want to be a part of a God-sized dream. This morning I want to wrestle with that thought. I want to wrestle and talk about what a God-sized dream is. And we're going to look through Ezekiel chapter 47. I love this moment in Ezekiel because it starts off with this really depressing moment. Ezekiel had been living in the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was overrun by a foreign army. Ezekiel was taken into captivity. And then all of a sudden, he finds himself in a place that he didn't want to be. Pretty depressing, pretty discouraging. But I don't know where you're at this morning. Maybe this morning you're finding yourself in a place that you don't want to be. Maybe you're finding yourself in a situation that you wish right now that you weren't in. COVID, I wish I wasn't in. The civil unrest, I wish we didn't have to live in it. The political climate, I wish we didn't have to deal with it. Finances, jobs, children going through hardships, sicknesses. There's a lot of things that we could say, gosh, I wish right now I didn't have to be here. In the moment that we didn't want to be in. But maybe God is calling our lives, calling us to make a change in our lives. Maybe sin has overtaken parts of our lives and God is calling us back. Ezekiel finds himself in a very similar position. He finds himself in a place that he didn't want to be. When the book opens up, Ezekiel is 30 years old. He is in a refugee camp in Babylon, which is modern day Iraq. And he finds himself, let's see if I'm tracking there. He finds himself in a place he didn't want to be there, but God gives him a vision. So the rest of the book is about these 6 visions that God gave to Ezekiel. My favorite vision is this one here in Ezekiel chapter 47. We're going to read it for you. The man of God brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple towards the east, for the temple faced east. The water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. He then brought me out through the north gate and led me around to the outside of the outer gate facing east. The water was trickling from the south side. Doesn't start off very encouraging. The temple of God, the temple in Jerusalem, just a trickle of water here. As the man went eastward with a measuring line in his hands, he measured off 1,000 cubits, which is about 5 football fields. And he led me through water that was ankle deep. And then he measured off another 1,000 cubits. And he led me through water that was knee deep. And he measured off another 1,000 cubits. And he led me through water that was up to the waist. He measured off another 1,000. And now it was a river that I could not cross, because the water had risen and was so deep, it was deep enough to swim in, a river that no one could cross. He asked me, "Son of man, do you see this?" He led me back to the bank of the river. When I arrived there, I saw a great number of trees on each side of the river. He said to me, "This water flows towards the eastern region and goes down to Arabah, where it enters the Dead Sea. When it empties into the sea, the salty water there becomes fresh. Swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. There will be large numbers of fish because the water flows there and makes the salty water fresh." I love this part. So where the river flows, everything will live. Fishermen will stand along the shore from the En Gedi to the En Galim. There will be places for spreading nets. The fish will be of many kinds, like the fish of the Mediterranean Sea. But the swamp and the marshes will not become fresh. They will be left for salt. Fruit trees of all kinds will grow on both banks of the river. Their leaves will not wither, nor will their fruit fail. Every month they will bear fruit, because the water of the sanctuary flows to them. Their fruit will serve for food, and their leaves for healing. The first thing that I want to share with us today is that God-sized dreams start really small. You know, sometimes the biggest things in the kingdom start off really small. Imagine what it would be like to have been there the day LeBron James touched his first basketball. I mean, wouldn't that be incredible to see a young LeBron James fumbling around this basketball? I mean, it would be incredible. But nobody paid attention to that moment. Nobody paid attention to the first time LeBron James touched a basketball. Why? Because they didn't know where the story was going to go. If they knew where the story would go, they would have been there with cameras. They would have been there documenting it. They would have been there measuring, watching his progress so that everybody that came after him could watch the whole story. They could measure it. They would see what it'd be. What about this guy? How cool would it be to be, how cool would it be to be there when Steve Jobs grabbed his first computer? Oh, no, Steve, here's the keyboard right here, buddy. Right here, this is the keyboard. Just hit these buttons right here. No, it's not on. You got to reach around and turn it on. You turn it on right here. I mean, if everybody would have known where Steve Jobs would have ended up, they would have documented his progress. They would have cared in the beginning, but nobody cared. Why? Why? You know, the greatest stories often start off with the smallest beginnings, and people don't follow it. You know, even right now, the greatest stories of your life, they're probably bubbling up right now. They're probably starting right now because that's how God works. God works by starting with small things. It takes a tiny beginning, and then as your faith grows, it starts to grow. And in 5, 10, 20, 50 years from now, you have done a great work for God. But it all starts now. I mean, think about Abraham and Sarah. They became the spiritual parents of this incredible movement of God. But how did it all begin? You know, God finally said, Abram, it's time for you to move out of your parents' house. He's 75 years old. You finally got to move out of your house. So if you get nothing from this sermon, remember this. Move out of your parents' house before you're 75. Get out of the house. And it became a thing, a small thing, one small step that led to a journey of faith that God ended up blessing him and creating an incredible movement through his faith. What about Moses? What about Moses? There he is. You know, you get to Exodus chapter 3, and Moses is now 80 years old. He squandered all of his possessions. He squandered his inheritance. He's married to the daughter of a pagan priest. He goes on this walk, and as he's going on this walk, he notices this bush is burning. And he looks into this bush and says, oh, that's a little peculiar. I've never seen a bush that burns and doesn't burn up, and that's really weird. So he kind of goes closer and closer, and he inspects it, and God speaks to him. And this tiny beginning led to God using him to liberate an entire nation of people from captivity. What about David? Who was David? You remember what David was doing before he killed Goliath? He wasn't even in the army. Where was David? He was at home with his father. His dad asked him to take lunch to his brothers who were on the battlefield. You know what this makes David? Yeah, he was the first Postmate driver. He was the first Uber food, what is it? Uber delivers. David was a trendsetter. But he shows up with this small, humble beginning, and God uses him delivering lunch to one of the greatest moments of of people of faith walk. This incredible larger than life moment. What about Esther? What did Esther do? What did she do to liberate these people? She had the courage to walk into the throne room when nobody else had the courage to walk in. One small step created this gigantic faith-building moment for God. And then, of course, there's Jesus. Jesus comes to earth. He didn't come with an army to conquer. He tells us he could. He could have easily. But no, he doesn't come that way. He comes as a baby in a town that's off the beaten path that very few knew about. And he doesn't show up with an army. He shows up and he chooses 12 friends. He chooses 12 friends. In the kingdom of God, the biggest stories have the smallest beginnings. The reality is they are so small that nobody even realizes that they're beginning. God is always working and moving, trying to cultivate our faith, cultivate the dreams that he's putting on our hearts. I love this passage in Zechariah 4. It says, do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. So much about faith is that we just need to get going. We just need to start doing something, anything. God is already working and putting things on your heart of what he's calling you to do. Who knows what God is doing right now? I want to share with you one of my favorite stories. This is Susanna Wesley. Susanna Wesley had a very tragic and hard life. Her and her husband, she was born in 1669. Her and her husband had 19 kids. You mothers out there can appreciate that alone. But 9 of her children died as toddlers. She raised her kids as a single mother because her husband was in and out of several prisons. Their house burned to the ground twice. She homeschooled all of her kids. She believed that her purpose, her reason for existence, was to disciple her children. So she believed that the reason why God put her on this earth was to disciple her children. So what she did was once a week, she would have a D time. She would have a time with each of her children, 1 hour per child per week. Now, remember, she lives in a 1-bedroom house, and there's lots of kids running around. Privacy was nowhere to be had. So what she would do is she would pull a blanket up over their heads. And the children, with one child at a time, she would have a 1-hour discussion with each of her children. So incredible. So, it cuts me to the core. Every Sunday afternoon, she would gather her children and she would teach a Bible class to her children. Well, the word started getting around. Her neighbors started asking, can we bring our family to your children's Bible class? So sure, so they had to move outside of the house and they had to go out to the front lawn and they're outside. And before long, more than 200 people would come to her Bible teaching class that she would do for her children. It's crazy. 2 of her children, John and Charles Wesley, grew up to lead one of the biggest revivals that the world has ever seen for God. You cannot be a Christian in this country and not live downstream from this woman. Her faith has impacted the entire Christianity that goes on in the United States. What she did was absolutely amazing, and we are all downstream from her faith. Now I have a question. Did she do this with you and I on her mind? Not at all. We were not even a thought of why she would do it. But she did help lead to reforms that led to reforms. Whether you agree wholeheartedly with her doctrine or not is not the point. The point is that she took a huge stand. She taught her children the Bible, that grew up being Bible teachers, that helped create the environment for us to be able to find the right doctrine or find the doctrine of your choice. So Susanna Wesley is one of my favorite stories. You know, in Ezekiel's vision in verse 2, it says that God walked Ezekiel around the temple. What do you see? He says, I just see a trickle. There's just a trickle of water coming from the temple. Sorry. In Ezekiel in Ezekiel verse 8, he said to me, this water flows towards the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah, where it enters the Dead Sea. When it empties into the sea, the salty water there becomes fresh. My first point is that God-sized dreams, first point was God-sized dreams start small. Second point, God-sized dreams, they flow to the low places. They flow to the low places. Sometimes the biggest things in the kingdom start off really small, but now they flow down to the lowest places. You know, when God is behind something, it may start in the temple, but it doesn't stay there. It may start in the mind of one of his sons and daughters, but it doesn't stay there. When God is behind something, its purpose is not to stay with the host that he chooses to unleash it with. His purpose is to send it downriver, to pass it on to one another, to take it to the world and get out the message of the gospel. You know, the river represents the presence and the power of God. It represents the presence and the power of God. What started off as a trickle, it was soon ankle deep. As they went down river, then it was up to their knees. And then before long, it was at their waist. And then before you knew it, it was so deep that you could swim in it. And it says that no one could cross it. See, God's plan, his message, his faith, it starts off small. There's small beginnings, but it flows down river. And if you notice, as it goes down river, it picked up more water. It picks up more strength. God's power becomes more perfect. It goes on and on and on. That's his plan. It grows and it flows to the desert and then into the Dead Sea. Now, if you know anything about the Dead Sea is the lowest land elevation on the earth. It is over 1,400 feet below sea level. The Dead Sea is the bottom of the earth. You know, any land on earth. Everything flows down to it. Nothing flows out of it. It's a basin. It just catches water. So because of that, it's 9 times saltier than the ocean water. It is so salty that nothing could live in it. It's impossible for things to live in it, right? People go there and they float because the salt creates all this buoyancy. But where the river flows down to it, there were great things happening. God tells Ezekiel, he says, hey, I want you to notice something. That these simple plans, these simple prayers that started off in the temple, they didn't stay in the temple. They now trickled out of the temple and they're flowing down, and they flow to the low places around you. Wherever it goes, things were changed. You know, God's plan for his disciples is that we would flow downriver. He's calling us to go out to the low places. He's calling us to take his river, his presence, his power, to go to the low places, to the people without God, to the college campuses, to the neighborhoods where Christians aren't, to households that don't have Jesus as their foundation, to take them into the workplace, to teach them to our children. God wants to take the trickle, the thoughts in your minds, the things that he's placing on your heart, the dreams that you have. And he's calling you to allow that to grow and build and turn into a river of his power and take it to the low places. This is what God does. God gives us dreams. He gives us thoughts. These things that start so small, you almost might even think like, am I even thinking right? God, why would you want me to do that? Why would you want me to be that guy? But he wants it to start there, but he doesn't want it to stay there. It feels so small, but what starts out small starts to flow. And where it flows, you start seeing things change, and it starts to bring life. You know, God-sized dreams, they bring life. It brings life. In verse 12, it says, fruit trees of all kinds will grow on both banks of the river. Fruit trees of all kinds will grow on both banks of the river. Their leaves will not wither, nor will their fruits fail. Every month they will bear fruit because the water from the sanctuary flows to them. Their fruit will serve for food and their leaves for healing. You know, when I was 27 years old, I was living on the ranch, and I decided that God must want me to go to Nashville to be a world famous songwriter. So I packed up everything I had, I put it in my truck, and I drove from Oregon to Nashville. Now that's another story. A lot of things happened on the way. But I was certain that God was calling me to be a famous songwriter, that I was going to be the next big thing. So I moved to Nashville, and I started to work on my dream. I was writing. I was going out to songwriter nights. I was playing. I was trying to get my name out there. But you know what? God had a different dream. God had a different dream. I started getting in trouble. I started going out to clubs and hanging out with a bad group of guys and getting in fights and just falling into all kinds of mischief. Let's just leave it clean. And I decided I needed to change. I needed to change. You know, this bar life just wasn't for me anymore. And I got to get my life together. I know what it is. I got to go to church and find me a good church girl. That was what I thought I needed. And then my dreams will still come true. But God had a different plan. God had a really different plan. I ended up going to church. I was church hopping, looking for a really strong church, which meant they had pretty girls. And I couldn't find one. And finally, somebody at my work said, you should ask Terry Campbell. Terry Campbell's known for inviting people to church. And I thought, what? There's somebody that's known for inviting people to church? Who does this, right? I mean, he must be a super Christian or just doesn't really have a life. And but one day I ran into Terry at work and I said, hey, you Terry Campbell? People tell me all kinds of things. They always say that you're inviting people to church. Oops, I shouldn't have said that. When are you going to invite me to church? Oh, man, that'd be great. You should come out to church. So he invites me out to church. I come out to church, and there's something so wrong. It was all guys. And I'm like, what kind of church is this? Right? This isn't what I come to God for. Guys. He's like, oh, no. We had a special women's event the night before. They met last night, so today is just the brothers getting together. We're gonna have a lesson just for the brothers. I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. So you do have girls in this church, though, right? I mean, Jesus, you got a strong ministry program and girls and things like that. Okay. So I came back the next week, and I was completely blown away. The preaching, everything. I was invited to a Bible study, and I was pretty prideful in myself, and I didn't need Jesus. I wasn't really coming to church for Jesus. And I told the guys that I was studying the Bible with, hey, if you guys are asking if I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian. It's okay. You don't have to worry about me. I'm a Christian. And we started reading some passages, and we got to John 8, 31, 32, and I don't have that up here. It says, to the Jews who had believed in Jesus said, if you hold to my teachings, you're really my disciples. And then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And these guys kept talking, but my mind froze. My mind stopped. And I'm like, did he just say that if I want to be Jesus' disciple, I have to hold to his teachings? See, I didn't know what his teachings were. I had never heard his teachings. So how can I hold to what I didn't know? Hey guys, I'm not a disciple. Oh, really? Okay, all right, well, let's fix that. And next week I was baptized. See, I came with a bunch of dreams. I came with a bunch of worldly ideas. But what I ran into was somebody who went to the lowest of places, to a guy like me, and shared his faith with me and helped me to come to the scriptures to see who Jesus was. And he brought me life. You know, I love this, that God-sized dreams don't just start small. They don't just go to the low places, but God-sized dreams bring life to people. You know, wherever the disciples of the Jax Church go, you need to bring life. You carry life whether you realize it or not, that there are people in your downstream. There are people that are being influenced by you, even if it's just your example. It may seem like just a trickle right now. You may not feel like a powerful spiritual figure. You may not feel like you have the strength of a Peter or a Paul or a James. But God is working right now to lead you through your trickle to build your flow. So soon it will grow. The power of God will build up behind you. And God says, Son of Man, Jax Church, do you not see this? Do you not see what I am doing right now through you? That trickle is now over your ankles. Do you see it? Look, it's covering your knees. Do you see it now? Look, it's up to your waist. Are you getting this? You can go swim. It's over your head. Do you see it now? It is so powerful that people can't even cross it. Son of Man, do you see it? See, you and I, we were dead. We were lost in our sin. We were lost in our transgressions. We were lost in our worldly dreams. We were lost in our selfish ambitions. But God allowed his river to flow to us. Wherever his river flows, it brings life. You know, the people that are watching right now, there's some people out there that are dead. We'll be running into people later today, everywhere we go, that are dead. We have friends that are dead, family members that are dead. There are people that are spiritually dead, and they need us to bring the river of life to them. Do you see this, Jax? Do you see this? Thousands of years ago, God started a trickle. It has been built into a mighty river of God. You know, the river of life, it brings hope. It provides for all that touch it. It heals the scars of the past, addictions, the wounds, the things that we feel like we're not good enough, we're not strong enough. It heals us. Through you, God is moving his powerful river. But do you see it? Do you see it? You know, God is starting something today in each and every one of you guys. That through you, His plan is to have fruit trees growing on both sides of the bank. That means there's fruit coming from your left, fruit coming from your right. There's fruit ahead of you. There's fruit behind you. That you are living a life of faith that is allowing fruit to grow, that will not fail wherever you go. Too often we settle for a little creek. We settle for worldly dreams. Jesus didn't die so that we can all have our personal creek, so that we can all have our own little world, our own little river. Jesus didn't die so that we can kind of feel better about our own decisions. We need to trust God. We need to trust the power of his river. There is no glory in worldly dreams. So let's all go out and dream about having God-sized dreams. To God be the glory. Amen.